he's right. Oh my God. Never in my wildest dreams, in 1991, did I dream or imagine I'd be standing up here in a group like this, talking about UFOs. It was scary enough, the idea of just staring at a TV camera that doesn't blink at you. It's very scary. I'm very shy. You don't know me as a lecturer. I'm kind of a new kid on the block. But chances are everybody in here has seen my artwork for the last 20 years in some fashion or another on book covers, magazine covers. My art has been on UFO Hunters. It's been on the cover of UFO magazine, thanks to Nancy Burns. And this is a chance for the artist to come out from behind the easel, from behind the canvas, which is a very comfortable place to be, I must tell you, and share a little bit about my point of view about the UFO phenomena that I've come to understand since 1980, which is when I became seriously involved with UFO illustration. I don't have a PhD. I don't have a top secret military background. I rose to the lofty rank of PFC when I was in the Army and in a finance office on Okinawa. The only classified hardware I've ever seen was the SR-71 was parked on the tarmac at Kadena Air Base, which is close to where I was stationed. That's it. I have not seen UFOs. I've never seen a UFO. I've seen weather balloons. I've seen mutilated cows. I've seen crop circles in England. But I have not actually seen a real UFO, flying saucer, unidentified flying object. But I am a believer as much as one can be. I'm a 99% believer, short of having a personal experience of my own. But that's the luxury of being an artist. Are any of these images familiar to you people? Yes? I'm kind of stodgy. I'm kind of old and stodgy. It was just a few years ago I finally broke down and got a personal computer. Thinking that, and this is after doing artwork for 20 years practically, thinking that I was a washout as an artist. I wanted to be an artist, but I figured I was a washout. Nobody gives a damn about the art I do until I started to surf the internet. And I was utterly staggered. Virtually every UFO site on the planet, bless their hearts, has my UFO art. So it's very flattering, very staggering, and it's important, I think, to be a part of this research phenomena to try to get to the bottom of what UFOs are all about. So with all my background doing UFO illustration, plus my background of doing the TV show, I feel as a private citizen I bring some measure of expertise to my point of view of what the UFO phenomena is all about. And so what we're going to talk about today, I have, if you go to my website, which is jimnicholsufoart.com, and if you click on blog, you'll see that I have a list of 21 essays about my personal views of the UFO phenomena, what I think is going on. And this is blog number 5, briefing paper, which is my point of view of the Eisenhower, the infamous myth of President Eisenhower's contact with UFOs and extraterrestrials in 1954. Yeah, here, that's me. I started out as a child. That's Cowboy Jim. I'm guarding the front porch of my house there in Ohio, and I don't have my 6-shooter. I don't know what earthly good I thought I was going to be protecting our home from the rustlers without my 6-shooter. But this is the early 50s. Early 50s, President Dwight Eisenhower was seated in the White House, very likely when this picture was taken. And I can remember as a kid in first grade going around saying, "I like Ike." Anybody here remember Dwight Eisenhower? Anybody? Any baby boomers here? Just a few. Okay, good. You remember. President Eisenhower reminded me of my dad. Ike and my dad had the same hairline. And my dad was a staunch Republican. So Ike never struck me as a particularly flamboyant president, but he seemed to be a good organizer. And I've learned over the years that President Eisenhower is capable of keeping secrets. How many here know that Dwight Eisenhower was a Jehovah's Witness? Ike could keep a secret. Ike could keep secrets. If it hadn't been for the U-2 being shot down over the Soviet Union in 1960, that would have been one of his biggest secrets, because he knew exactly what the Soviets were doing for a long time because of our U-2 flights. The American public didn't know about that, and it kept us one step ahead of the Soviets, and that was kind of the way Ike did things. But anyway, we're going to re-examine the myth of President Eisenhower's contact with extraterrestrials in 1954. I've heard this story for years within the UFO circles, and I did not believe it. I thought this is preposterous. I could not imagine President Dwight Eisenhower having face-to-face contact with extraterrestrials. But over the years, I've kind of changed my tune on that, and it has become one of my favorite UFO myths. My initial introduction to UFOs was the Billy Meyer story. That was one of my first favorite UFO myths. And then I came to know about the German saucer stories. I didn't believe those at first either. Now I'm not so sure. But I offer this information. I can't prove it. This is all based on conjecture and anecdotal stories. So I share this material with the disclaimer that it cannot be absolutely verified and may be viewed as clever disinformation, palpable lies, entertaining fiction, or the way things really are. When we go through this material, everybody's concerned today about disclosure. Disclosure. When we go through this material and we're done with it, you might think that disclosure maybe not be such a good idea. That it will reveal things about our government that they have kept secret from you for a long time and intend to keep secret. So it's like Roswell. Roswell becomes a cliche. Oh, that happened a long time ago. It has nothing to do with me now. Same with the Eisenhower contact. This happened a long time ago. It has nothing to do with me now. I suggest to you that the Eisenhower contact is maybe at least, if not more important than the Roswell contact, and has absolute relevance with what is going on with the UFO disclosure issue right now. So, to put this in a proper framework, I'm going to give you a little history lesson. We need to go back in time and look at what the world was like in the late 40s and the early 50s that puts this story in its proper context. So let's go back to May 1945. What had happened? The United States had just won the biggest war in planetary history, World War II. We'd gained the unconditional surrender of the Third Reich. We defeated Imperial Japanese Navy, or the Empire of Japan. At the end of World War II, the United States was the most powerful military entity on the planet. We had the atomic bomb, and we proved that we were not scared to use it. We were invincible. We were the top dog, and we had the biggest stick on the playground, and we were prepared to use it. And then something happened. July 1947, Roswell, New Mexico, something that we couldn't explain crashed in the New Mexico desert. Well, no big deal, it's New Mexico, right? New Mexico at that time, in 1947, was home to the most sensitive military establishment technologies that our country possessed. We had the atomic bomb development in Los Alamos, the 509th at Roswell, the first Strategic Air Command bomb group, had just gone operational. White Sands Missile Range, just down the road from Roswell, where our fledgling rocket program was being designed, was underway, thanks to Wernher von Braun. Our most sensitive military establishment at that time was compromised. Something from outer space, something from dimensions perhaps that we didn't even know about, was able to intrude upon our most sensitive military hardware. Of course, we have the crash at Roswell. It's a cliche now. Say, well, what, Roswell, big deal. In 1947, this was a very big deal because this could have been the potential of an extraterrestrial invasion that we had absolutely no defense against. So, do we tell the public that? Does the public want to know that we could be invaded militarily at any time and we had absolutely no defense against it? Scary stuff. So, our good friend Harry Truman, who was president at the time, had this hot potato dumped in his lap. And he had to scramble fast to come up with some kind of way to cope with this issue. He had his hands full dealing with the Russians and the Soviets in Korea, and now he had this on top of it. And he had to get answers fast, and he had to get answers quietly. We could not create a national panic. So, General Nathan Twining, head of Air Materiel Command, put forth a proposal to President Truman that the UFO issue was bigger than the Manhattan Project and required to be managed on a larger scale and obvious for a longer period. They would form nothing less than a government within the government. Pay attention to this, people. They would form nothing less than a government within the government, sustaining itself from presidential administration to presidential administration, regardless of whatever political party took power, and ruthlessly guarding their secrets while evaluating every new bit of information on flying saucers they received. But at the same time, they would allow disclosure of some of the more far-fetched information, whether true or not, because it would help to create a climate of public attitude that would be able to accept the existence of extraterrestrial life without a general sense of panic. I submit to you that I stand before you today as a product of that conditioning. When I was a kid, back when I was in first grade, my favorite movies were science fiction. My favorite TV shows were things like Walt Disney, Man in Space, where he had Wernher von Braun showing how we were going to send a rocket to the moon. I love that stuff. And to this day, we are still inundated with science fiction, movies, TV shows, books, periodicals, tabloids. We have been fed a steady diet since 1947 of disclosure. They have been giving you disclosure on a silver platter, but it comes from Hollywood. It has no taint of officiality to it. The government maintains a posture that no, there's nothing out of the ordinary exists, yet at the same time, you're being told daily about the extraterrestrial issue to make you comfortable with it. And I'm a product of that conditioning. Everybody in here who's a baby boomer has been exposed to that conditioning. The fact that you're even here is the success of that conditioning. Anyway, this happened a long time ago. This is now, today. So what they decided to do is to form a secret group, a secret agency that would deal exclusively with the ET issue. And it has, of course, been classified as Majestic 12, MJ12, the Jason Group, whatever you want to call it, to specifically deal with this issue. And to do it quietly, very discreetly, so it doesn't ruffle the public's feathers. And so there's some of the major players in MJ12. General George C. Marshall, who was Secretary of State. Nathan Twining. General Hoyt Vandenberg. Admiral James Forrestal, who had been Secretary of the Navy, became Secretary of Defense. And most notable is Vice Admiral Roscoe Hillenkotter, who became the head of the CIA, which came into being almost just very shortly after the Roswell crash. Now, is there some kind of connection with that? You decide. And the most noted scientist on it with MJ12 was, of course, Dr. Vannevar Bush, who in the late 40s, early 50s was touted as being the most brilliant scientist in the United States. He was so brilliant, in fact, that Harry Truman didn't trust him. He didn't trust him. Vannevar Bush wanted to share scientific secrets and information with the Soviets. Harry Truman didn't like that. But because of his expertise and his brilliance, he was included with MJ12. And you're probably familiar with this, also this cliche, that Wilbert Smith was a Canadian scientist who publicly stated that Dr. Vannevar Bush was in fact connected with a secret government agency that dealt specifically with UFOs, and UFOs being within the United States government the most highly classified subject in the United States government, rating higher even than that of the H-bomb. But there were UFO issues going on with our military that were occurring prior to the crash at Roswell. During the latter months of World War II, they were having so many UFO sightings in the Pacific during the war that General Douglas MacArthur set up his own investigating unit called the IPU, Interplanetary Phenomena Unit. And he had amassed, by the end of the war, he had amassed as many as 2,000 reports of UFO sightings within the Pacific Command. And he sent those on up the chain of command to, and also, General MacArthur allegedly had a contact of his own at Clark Air Base in the Philippines, I believe in 1945. He sent these reports up the chain of command to the head of military intelligence, who at that time was General Wild Bill Donovan. Wild Bill Donovan squelched the reports. He wouldn't pass them on up to higher authority. Well, that didn't sit well with Douglas MacArthur. So he classified all UFO sightings and reports within his command right up until he was fired in 1951 by President Harry S. Truman. Harry has a habit of giving these medals and citations to his military commanders just before he fires them. Harry Truman didn't like Eisenhower. He didn't like MacArthur. I can't think of anybody Harry Truman really liked. Well, Douglas MacArthur wasn't about to be told what to do by the CIA. But Douglas and MacArthur had no use for the CIA, and he wasn't going to comply with MJ-12 or their order, their gag order. So in 1955, when Douglas MacArthur retired, he made this statement: "The nations of the world will have to unite, for the next war will be an interplanetary war. The nations of the earth must someday make a common front against attack by people from other planets." This is Douglas MacArthur. What did he know that would prompt him to make a statement like this? What was he smoking in that corncob pipe? Common front against attack by people from other planets. Douglas MacArthur knew something was up. So, moving right along, 1953, General Dwight Eisenhower, former Supreme Allied Commander who had led the Allied armies in Europe to victory, became President of the United States. And he inherited quite a mess too, extraterrestrials notwithstanding. We were dealing quite heavily with the Soviet threat at that time. The Soviets were on the move in Korea. They were on the move in Eastern Europe. Ike had his hands full, keeping them contained. And Ike advocated a superior military force in this country, that only military supremacy would keep the Soviet aggression at bay. This was Eisenhower's basic policy. But Eisenhower was also an avid golfer, and he was not shy about taking time off to go play golf. And one of his favorite places, he had a friend that lived in Palm Springs, California, close to Smoke Tree Ranch Resort. So on February 20th, 1954, just a week after going quail hunting in Georgia, President Dwight Eisenhower took off for Smoke Tree Ranch to play golf. By late afternoon of the 20th, February 20th, 1954, the press had lost track of President Eisenhower. He wasn't on the links, and the press had no idea where he was. So by late afternoon, the press was, they said it was sheer pandemonium. United Press said that President Eisenhower had had a heart attack. Associated Press filed a story that said Eisenhower was dead. So they set up a press conference at the Mirador Hotel in Palm Springs, where Press Secretary James Hagerty did his very best to get the press calmed down. I said, no, the president is fine. He was dining with his friends, and he broke a tooth. And he had to be rushed to a dentist. This is the cover story. As this myth goes, this is the cover story. That President Eisenhower disappeared for 48 hours because he broke a tooth. The myth, the UFO myth, says that President Eisenhower was escorted secretly to nearby Muroc Air Base, which is Edwards Air Force Base, close to Palm Springs. He was secreted away for 48 hours for a prearranged meeting with extraterrestrials. Now, this is kind of a gray area. The way I understand it, this is already prearranged. I assume that MJ-12, between the Roswell crash and its formation, had its own liaison with extraterrestrials. And they had already drawn up a treaty They had already drawn up a treaty with these extraterrestrials. And the only reason they dragged Eisenhower was out there was so he could sign the damn treaty. Well, it was everybody on the base. The base, as I understand, was locked down for 48 hours. Nobody was allowed on the base or off the base. And everybody involved with this was sworn to absolute secrecy. Well, they were secret till about April, when a gentleman who was the director of Borderland Sciences in Los Angeles by the name of Meade Lane got a very strange letter from a personal friend of his by the name of Gerald Light. And this is a fragment of what Gerald Light had to say. Gerald Light was present with Eisenhower's entourage at Muroc when they met the ETs. It says, the report is true, devastatingly true. I had the distinct feeling the world had come to an end with fantastic realism. For I have never seen so many human beings in a state of complete collapse and confusion as they realized their own world had indeed ended. The reality of other plane aeroforms is now and forever removed from the realms of speculation and made a rather painful part of the consciousness of every responsible scientific and political group. During the 2 days visit, I saw 5 separate and distinct types of aircraft being studied and handled by our Air Force officials, with the assistance of the Etherians, the extraterrestrials. I have no words to express my reactions. It has finally happened. It is now a matter of history. This may be what Eisenhower saw at the hangar at Muroc Air Base. Close Encounters. The movie Close Encounters is allegedly based, in part, on President Eisenhower's contact at Muroc in 1954. There was a British UFO investigator by the name of Lord Clancarty who also stated that he was told by an unnamed American test pilot who was also present at Muroc that the extraterrestrials demonstrated their paranormal powers by making themselves invisible, causing Eisenhower considerable embarrassment. The ETs demonstrated technologies that were beyond our comprehension. And they also demonstrated that they had military power, technological power that would render all Earth defenses useless. So it was kind of, yeah, let's make a deal, but we got you over a barrel. And one of the groups, and sorry, we'll get into this a little bit later. There were 2 groups that Eisenhower met with. One of the groups was the classic gray extraterrestrials. Now, the grays that he met with, allegedly, they told him they came from Zeta Reticulum, that they were not here, they had no intention of threatening the Earth, that they were a dying race, that their species was dying and that needed an infusion of genetic material from humans of Earth to revitalize their species. That was their purported intent for coming here. Allegedly, Eisenhower shown bodies, flying discs, and actual live ETs. Now, Gerald Light, who was present there, he said there was complete pandemonium. The people who were assembled to witness this contact were in such a state of shock that it was a cross-section of how the American public might react to this in general. And the reactions were so bad that President Eisenhower decided he couldn't tell anybody about this. Nobody could be told. And Gerald Light thought that Eisenhower would, that he would come forward and publicly announce that, yeah, there really are ETs and we're not alone in the universe, and they're here. But President Eisenhower, like I said, knew how to keep a secret. Now this is Edwin Norris, allegedly Edwin Norris, who was with the Brookings Institution, was also present at Muroc. And it was the Brookings Institution that 6 years later published the Brookings Report, the famous Brookings Report, which was developed for NASA, which suggested that it was an overview of what might be the sociological impact of our manned space program if we encountered extraterrestrials. And if with our space flights, with our space probes, if we did in fact learn that we were not alone in the universe, that there were extraterrestrials out there, the Brookings Institution recommended that we perhaps better keep it a secret. So here we're starting to see this dissonance. Here's the truth, but this is what you can know. And it's like, and you'll see as this goes along, this kind of snowballs. According to the Brookings Institute report, it made the conclusion that anthropological files contain examples of societies sure of their place in the universe, which have disintegrated when they had to associate with previously unfamiliar societies espousing different ideas and different life ways. And the key word here is disintegrated. Disintegrated. Remember what Nathan Twining did? What Nathan Twining said, we're going to create a separate government. At that point, the United States started to become disintegrated. Now, this is additional information that has surfaced from an Italian researcher just within the last 2 years. His name is Cristoforo Barbato. And according to Cristoforo Barbato, Bishop James McIntyre of the Los Angeles Diocese was also present at Muroc on February 20th, 1954 with the Eisenhower delegation. And this is a fascinating story. Bishop McIntyre was also sworn to secrecy. But Bishop McIntyre realized that this event, this phenomenon, was so important that he could not keep it from the Vatican. He had a responsibility to the United States, yes, but he also had a responsibility to the Vatican in Rome. So Bishop McIntyre, as the story goes, got on a plane bound for Rome. The plane was ordered to land in Las Vegas. He left Los Angeles. He got as far as Las Vegas, and they ordered the plane to land. Military personnel came on board the plane and reminded Bishop McIntyre of his oath of secrecy. And then the bishop smiles and says, okay, I understand, thank you. The military officer left the plane, it took off, and he went to Rome anyway. And he met with Pope Pius XII. Pope Pius was so concerned by what Bishop McIntyre had shared with him that they set up an investigative unit within the Vatican to study the extraterrestrial issue. Barbato stated that, but these events took an unexpected turn because McIntyre and other SIV is the Vatican's CIA. Other SIV members began to have direct contact. The Vatican itself started to have direct contact with extraterrestrials. The Vatican began to have direct contact with an alien race of the Nordic type, apparently benevolent, coming from the Pleiades. These aliens advised to be careful with the other creatures, the Greys, encountered in the California desert. These meetings with the members of SIV Happened many times in the United States and twice also inside the Vatican Gardens near the Pontifical Academy of Science in the presence of Pope Pius XII. So this expands the story a little bit. Eisenhower didn't meet just one group, he allegedly met two groups. As the story goes, he met with the Nordic, the Pleiadians first. And they warned him that the United States was on a suicide course with its development of atomic weapons, that they would ultimately use them and they would render the planet uninhabitable. So they made him a deal. They said, Mr. President, if you will cease and desist from the development of atomic weapons, we will supply you with free energy technologies. Sounds like a deal. In the context, the political context at the time with the growing threat of Soviet aggression, Eisenhower declined. The Pleiadians said, okay, packed up their bags and left, and that's when the Greys arrived. The Greys said, you want technology? No sweat, we'll give it to you. But it will come at a cost. Servizio Informazioni del Vaticano, it's the Vatican CIA. It's the Political Academy of Sciences where the pontiff allegedly, along with Bishop McIntyre and also Bishop Edward Mooney of Detroit, met with extraterrestrials from the Pleiades. Well, Ike realized that they had him over a barrel. But this is what the treaty entailed. The treaty stated that the aliens would not interfere in our affairs and we would not interfere with theirs. We would keep their presence on Earth a secret. They would furnish us with advanced technology and would help us in our technological development. They would not make any treaty with any other Earth nation. They could abduct humans on a limited, periodic basis for the purpose of medical examination and monitoring of our development, with the stipulation that the humans would not be harmed. They would be returned to their point of abduction. They would have no memory of the event, and that the alien nation would furnish Majestic 12 with a list of all human contacts and abductees on a regular scheduled basis. It was agreed that the bases would be constructed underground for the use of the alien nation, and that two bases would be constructed for the joint use of the alien nation and the United States government. Exchange of technology would take place in the jointly occupied bases. These alien bases would be constructed under Indian reservations in the Four Corners area of Utah, Colorado, New Mexico, and Arizona, presumably Dulce. And one would be constructed in the area known as, you guessed it, Dreamland, a remote section of Nellis Air Force Base, Area 51, in Nevada. Are we surprised? No. So yeah, they would have access, free access to the American public without the American public's advice or consent. That was the deal that was made for you. Well, after at the 50th anniversary of the Roswell crash, Lieutenant Colonel Philip Corso, who had been former National Security Advisor to President Eisenhower, wrote his own story. And I'm sure you're familiar with the day after Roswell. Well, this is what Philip Corso had to say about the aliens that Eisenhower is making a deal with. These creatures weren't benevolent alien beings who had come to enlighten human beings. They were genetically altered human automatons, cloned biological entities, actually who were harvesting biological specimens on Earth for their own experimentation. As long as we were incapable of defending ourselves, we had to allow them to intrude as they wished. We had negotiated a kind of surrender with them as long as we couldn't fight them. genetically altered human automatons. And how many of you are familiar with Phil Schneider? Phil Schneider, former Department of Defense geologist and engineer who went public with what he knew about the extraterrestrial issue and was murdered for his efforts in 1996. Phil stated that back in 1954, under the Eisenhower administration, the federal government decided to circumvent the Constitution of the United States and form a treaty with alien entities. It was called the Granada Treaty, which basically made the agreement that the aliens would take a few cows and test their implant techniques on a few human beings, and that they had to give details about the people involved. Slowly, the aliens altered the bargain until they decided they wouldn't abide by it at all. And who was going to stop them? Art Campbell. Art Campbell has just recently come up with an additional alien contact with Eisenhower that took place at Holloman Air Force Base in 1955. This is like a year later. As the story goes, Air Force One, the Columbine 3, landed at Holloman Air Force Base, taxied to a deserted stretch of tarmac. It was not met by military officials from the base. It was not met by a brass band, and yet the President of the United States was on board. The plane landed. 3 flying saucers approached the base. 1 landed in front of the Columbine 3. And President Eisenhower alone was seen departing Air Force One, walked on board the flying saucer, and was on board for 45 minutes. After 45 minutes, he alone departed the plane, got back on Air Force One. If it was the same Eisenhower, who knows? Now, interesting sidelight to this was that also on board Air Force One at that time was famed television radio personality Arthur Godfrey. Well, why would they have, they're going to play his ukulele and wear his Hawaiian shirt? Arthur Godfrey was one of the most beloved entertainers of the 50s. But Arthur Godfrey, and not only that, Arthur was a reserve Navy officer and a skilled pilot. But Arthur Godfrey, along with famed newscaster Edward R. Murrow, both these gentlemen worked for National Civil Defense to prepare pre-recorded messages in case the United States was attacked. They said it would, if these 2 gentlemen made the announcement, it would help mitigate some of the panic. Is that why Arthur Godfrey was on board Air Force One, in case things went bad with Eisenhower's contact again? Now, this is interesting. How many remember the UFO cover-up live from back in the 1980s? Nobody remembers that. That was 2 hours worth of disclosure, and you people don't remember that. It's a very important disclosure. Anyway, producer Robert Emenegger claimed that he saw, or he was shown, film footage of an alleged UFO contact at Holloman Air Force Base. Now, whether this is the same Holloman Air Force Base contact that involved Eisenhower or not, I don't know. But anyway, what Robert Emenegger said was he described his craft there. Well, he described the craft as kind of bathtub shaped. And the aliens had kind of a grayish skin. They had cat eyes, slit eyes, and they spoke with a translator, some kind of translator device, where they were able to communicate with the base commander. and they had kind of a strange turban affair on their heads. Allegedly, these contacts were filmed. According to Cristoforo Barbato and his Vatican source, that the contact in Murrock was filmed, but they couldn't use electric-powered motion picture cameras because the presence of the extraterrestrials made the electronic equipment not function. So they had to use wind-up film cameras. Anyway, Eisenhower find that he's got himself backed into a corner. We've made this deal with the extraterrestrials. They have access to bases in New Mexico and Nevada. And to initiate these mutual defense projects, to capitalize on these technological advances that the aliens were offering, it was going to cost incredible sums of money that could not come through the Congress. If the Congress has to allocate monies for these projects, they have to know why and what these monies are being allocated for. And that would compromise the security. That would compromise the secrecy. So to maintain secrecy, they had to find another way to fund it. And this extremely expensive projects. Trillions of American dollars that disappear without a trace, and the Federal Reserve can't explain where that money went. You cannot tell me that somebody somewhere knows exactly where that money is and what it's being spent for. But you can't know that. So, to finance the secret government, the secret projects going on with the aliens, they had to find another source. So there's these Zapata Oil Corporation on the coast of Texas had these offshore oil rigs. And Zapata Oil Corporation's chief executive, chief CEO, does anybody know who that was? Oops. George Herbert Walker Bush. Well, the CIA decided that they could use these offshore oil rigs to funnel illegal drugs into the United States for the purpose of creating a financial base for the government alien operations. Well, it was so successful, George Bush rose to the president, or the head of the director of the CIA. Talk about a player. This is what has been financing, in a large part, the secret projects. War in Vietnam. Opium production in Afghanistan has increased 500% since we've been there. You think there's a connection here? So, Ike realized that he had been had. And I do not fault President Eisenhower. I think he did the best he could under the circumstances. He capitulated to a treaty thinking that we could buy time to where we could get ourselves technologically advanced, where we could protect ourselves. We could at least get on par with the extraterrestrials so we could defend ourselves. So to buy time, President Eisenhower capitulated to this treaty, much to his regret. President Eisenhower left office in 1961, and I'm sure all of you are aware of his famous speech as he left office, his warning about the military-industrial complex. He realized that we had created an entity that was a government unto itself, that was leeching off the financial resources of our nation without our advice and consent. And he realized that he was a key component in the creation of this entity. So what did Ike say when he left office? He said there's grave danger that an announced need for increased, no, that's Kennedy, I'm sorry. The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist. We must never let the weight of this combination endanger our liberties or democratic processes. He called it the military-industrial complex. I would call it the military intelligence-industrial complex, because we had created an intelligence agency that was starting to dictate policy to the government. The tail was wagging the dog. The CIA was designed by Truman to gather intelligence so our military could protect our country. What we had created was an intelligence agency that was dictating policy through the Pentagon as what the president should do and when he should do it, and without asking questions. This is what had been created. This is the nightmare that President John F. Kennedy inherited in 1961. I seriously doubt that President Kennedy took office with any inkling of what was going on behind the scenes with MJ-12 and our alien treaty. But he was suspicious about the drift our nation was taking with the influence and the interference of the CIA and the Pentagon. And Kennedy made this interesting quote. He made this address to the American Newspaper Publishers Association on April 27th, 1961, where he stated, "There's grave danger that an announced need for increased security will be seized upon by those anxious to expand its meaning to the very limits of official censorship and concealment. There is very little in ensuring the survival of our nation if our traditions do not survive with it." So Kennedy was under increased pressure from both the Pentagon and the CIA as to how to run the country. And I suspect that President Kennedy really was not supposed to be elected to begin with. Richard Nixon was supposed to be elected, and Richard Nixon would have been a perfect rubber stamp for the CIA and the Pentagon. Kennedy was not that way. Kennedy was going to be his own man, and that got Kennedy in a lot of trouble. We had the failed Bay of Pigs invasion, followed by the Cuban Missile Crisis, which put Kennedy in direct odds with the CIA. Kennedy, after the Cuban Missile Crisis, Kennedy was absolutely furious with the CIA. In fact, he took steps to dismantle the CIA. He promised to break it into 1,000 pieces and scatter it to the winds. He fired CIA Director Allen Dulles. Now, the rumor is that allegedly Kennedy found out about the ET treaty. He found out about the drug deals. He found out about the secret financing, and he said he was going to put a stop to it. He gave an ultimatum to the CIA. He gave an ultimatum to MJ-12 that you either stop this or I'm going to take this to the public. Just 10 days prior to Kennedy's assassination, he made this quote at Columbia University. "The high office of the presidency has been used to foment a plot against the American people. Before I leave office, I must inform the citizen of his plight." Kennedy should have blown the whistle right then and there. It might have saved his life. Of course, he didn't. But we know the consequences. Warren Commission? Who's there on the Warren Commission? The very man that Kennedy fired, Allen Dulles. Talk about having a fox in the hen house. Now, this gentleman on the far right is Hale Boggs. Let's see if I can point him out to you here. This guy, Hale Boggs. He went public and said the Warren Commission was a fraud. He says it was a fiction. Hale Boggs disappeared in a flight over Alaska in 1972. And like I said, who presided over the Warren Commission? Allen Dulles. So this brings us back to Nathan Twining. Remember what Nathan Twining said. They would form nothing less than a government within the government, sustaining itself from presidential administration to presidential administration, regardless of whatever political party took power, and ruthlessly guarding their secrets. They meant it when they said ruthless, while evaluating every new bit of information on flying saucers they received. My question to you is, who is really in charge here? CIA? Who's in charge of the CIA? Who's pulling the strings here? Did we develop MJ-12 to protect the United States people? Or is MJ-12 controlling us, being as liaison to these guys? Now, remember what the Bible said? By their fruits ye shall know them. Over the decades since Kennedy's death, illegal drug use has reached epidemic proportion. Alien abductions and cattle mutilations are common cliches. Notorious Area 51, the not-so-secret military base, is synonymous with UFOs and classified aircraft. Classified aircraft. Ben Rich, former head of the Skunk Works, Lockheed Skunk Works at Area 51, he made this statement: "We already have the means to travel among the stars, but these technologies are locked up in black projects, and it would take an act of God to ever get them out to benefit humanity." Well, what the hell? If we're paying for it, why don't we benefit from it? Who benefits from this? George Bush rose to the directorship of the CIA and eventually the presidency of the United States, to be followed by his son as well, both of whom have expanded American militarism abroad and oppressive domestic surveillance at home. An evil exists that threatens every man, woman, and child of this great nation. We must take steps to ensure our domestic security and protect our homeland. Who said that? George Bush? I don't think so. The more things change, the more they stay the same. So this is my question to you. Who's in charge now? What was MJ-12 really created for? What was the CIA really created for? To benefit you? Or somebody who's not even on this planet? And this is what Philip Corso suggested. Philip Corso surmised that this whole Roswell crash, the whole MJ-12 scenario was a Trojan horse. And somebody off planet is pulling the strings. Microchips. Where do we first hear about microchips? Alien abductions, right? And now who wants to put microchips in all of us? Your government. You think there's a connection between that and the ETs? We're in a lockdown here, people. It's time to wake up. Humanity is not about to be invaded. Humanity is not in the middle of an invasion. Humanity has been invaded. And the invasion is nearly in its final stages. Great invasions do not happen with thundering smoke and nuclear weaponry. That is the mark of an immature society. Great invasions happen in secrecy. And if I may, I'd like to share one more quote from Colonel Philip Corso. He also stated that we were convinced that whoever the UFO extraterrestrials were, they were tampering with our planet, operating with impudence, and manipulating us constantly and secretly. But it was a secret that had our full compliance because we were unwilling to admit the truth and fight the war. Those of us in the military who knew what was happening also felt that we could be experiencing an invasion that was more of an infiltration. They were compromising our very systems of defense and government. Who's really in charge here? Who does MJ-12 answer to? We the people? Or they the aliens? Okay. Just in passing, I have 28 minutes. Let's wrap this up. These are my sources. Day at Roswell, or Day After Roswell by Philip Corso. Behold a Pale Horse by Bill Cooper. Bill Cooper predicted the attack on the trade towers in June of 2001. He was shot dead by eager sheriff's deputies at his home 2 months after 9/11. Bill always said, if they kill me, you'll know I was telling the truth. And I can't recommend this book highly enough to you. You have to find this in the used bookstores. Extra-Terrestrial Friends and Foes. If you want a good dose of disclosure, read this book. I said this is an issue that you might not feel comfortable having President Obama telling you about. George Andrews. Alien Contact by Timothy Good. Of course, The Alien Agenda. Jim Marrs. Rise of the Fourth Reich by Jim Marrs. Excellent books, excellent research. Roswell Incident, which gives a really good rundown of the Eisenhower contact. Exopolitics. Oh, who put that in there? Who did that? Did I? Well, anyway. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you. Thank you. We have 26 minutes left, and I would be happy to answer any questions anyone would care to have, but you need to go to the microphone. Where's the microphone? Right here. Any questions, comments, raspberries? Please, microphone. Don't be camera shy, Bob. Ladies and gentlemen, Robert Dean.
I just wanted to remind you that a former MJ6 died yesterday. You probably knew that.
Tell us.
Alexander Haig.
Alexander Haig died. I didn't know that. I was not aware of that.
He was MJ6 for many years.
And he was MJ6?
And they still are alive and well.
Exactly.
And it just dawned on me, old friend, that you have become dangerous. You have become dangerous. You didn't hear that?
Did you hear? I'm not hearing.
I said you have become dangerous.
Dangerous?
Yes. Steps must be taken.
I'm just a hayseed from Ohio. What do I know?
Bullshit. You have laid out some truths this afternoon, and I'm sure that everybody assembled here recognizes the truth when they see it and hear it.
Thank you, Bob.
And I want to compliment you.
Thank you.
And keep up the good work and keep looking over your shoulder.
All I can say, none of this is all information that's in public domain. There's nothing hidden here. You do your own research, maybe I'm wrong. Do your own research, but it's not hidden. This stuff is not hidden. If you do a little extra work, you can find what the hell is going on. Now, knowing what I've shared with you today, how many people want disclosure? Oh, yeah. Do you have what it takes to deal with what that may precipitate? That's what you have to ask yourself. Because you're talking about restructuring our entire government and military, everything. Yes?
Yeah, I think it's a great irony because what we have done, what the advanced countries on Earth have done to so-called third world countries is being done to the whole planet.
Well, then I ask, is that a reflection of the alien mind that is running our government, our military.
It could well
Think about
be.
it. Think about it.
I would recommend in your source material Confessions of an Economic Hitman.
Thank you.
I think we got some ET economic hitmen. that
You
have
bet we
arrived.
do. I strongly suspect, yes.
Hello, sir.
Hi.
I've done a lot of research in the last 10-year period, and I've come to the same conclusions that you have in your presentation. 2 years ago, I met Ed Grimsley, and Ed has shown the world that you can see UFO craft every clear night using the night vision goggles.
Exactly.
And so I add to that, if you can see UFOs with the night vision goggles, then everything else is a lie. Now what?
Well, that's part of the problem. We're limited to our 3D reality that we can perceive only with our senses. The ETs can see infrared. They function in infrared because their eyes can see infrared. We can't see it, so if they're flying around and they're in an infrared band, you say, well, they're not there. But with the goggles, with infrared goggles, hell, you can see them flying all over the place. Good point, thank you.
I heard people, oh, that's not so, everything else is a lie. But if you believe that everything is true, then everything else is a lie. So if you start from the premise that everything is a lie, you're more apt to be able to take the time, which, oh, I don't have the time. Oh, I don't have the time. You may take the time to rationalize that, in fact, everything else is a lie. Because we know anybody here can come out and look through the night vision. You will see craft around the planet right now.
Right.
Some estimates as many as 4 million. Knowing that, everything else is a lie.
Let me just hitchhike on that. I visited one of the gates at Area 51 back in 1994. You go south of Rachel, Nevada, about 10 miles, and there's a blockhouse there, a guardhouse, with military personnel staring at you behind their sunglasses. They don't smile, they don't talk, cold as ice. There's big cameras on top of the guardhouse watching everything you do. And I had to ask myself, standing at that fence, which side of the fence is the real United States? Where's the real? Is there a completely different country over here on the other side of that fence that runs our lives and we have no control over it or knowledge of it? What is the real? Yes.
Hi, can you speculate as to the different types of alien entities that you have heard or researched are involved in this
Different-
control? Because
Can you speak up just a little, the different types of...
kinds of alien entities that you have researched or found out from speculation that are in control because they're supposed to be, if they're warring factions, then which...
That's a whole other area of research. I think there's only two groups that have we need to be concerned with immediately that have probably don't have our best interest in mind. That would be the Greys and the reptilians. And as I understand it, the Greys actually are the front men of the reptilians. Now, I'm sure there's other groups out there, benevolent or neutral or whatever, but for our immediate interest here, I think that the issue that is raised in the Eisenhower contact is the Greys and their influence, their direct influence on the government that influences us. That's our immediate issue. If there's others out there, that's fine. We'll deal with them when we get to them. But it's the Greys that are most important considering this issue. Thank you.
Yes.
Speak up.
I want to ask you about the quote from Twining, where you got it from.
Excuse me, I can't hear.
The quote from Twining about the
Nathan Twining?
government inside of government and stuff. Where was that from?
Where was that from? That's from The Day After Roswell, Phil Corso's book.
And where did he get that quote from?
Phil Corso.
I mean, is there any other place, the source for it?
Excuse me?
Is there any independent source for that
Independent
quote?
source of that? You might look at Timothy Good's book.
Who?
Timothy Good,
And which book?
Above Top Secret?
All right, thank you.
Yes.
I wonder if you can shed some light on the alien interview by Lawrence Spencer.
Put your mic up. Move the mic up.
By Lawrence Spencer. The Roswell crash had one living alien in it, and then was interviewed by this McDonald McElroy, and the alien told her that the Earth has been a prison planet for thousands of years.
Yeah, right. Okay. Have you seen the Showtime movie that was made called Roswell?
No, I don't think I saw that.
Because in the film Roswell, it was produced by Paul Davids for Showtime. They did portray the fact that there wasn't one captured gray that they had at a secret facility, presumably Area 51, that MJ-12 was working with. So it's like at some point there had to be some kind of liaison between the extraterrestrials and MJ-12 to where they could set up exchange and treaties and draw up a treaty. And I like I said, I think that MJ-12 did all the groundwork with the Greys, and then they just dragged Eisenhower out to Muroc and had him sign the treaty. But there has to be an agency that was already interfacing with the extraterrestrials to even get that far. Does that answer your question?
Well, sort of. And in the book, it talks about like two empires: the old empire, which was very degenerate.
Oh, right.
and
Also,
the
yes, you're right.
domain, which is trying to dismantle the prison system, and they've already cleaned out the old empire ships, and and since they came in here, then all this booming technology.
There's a lot of speculation and conjecture about discovering artifacts and underground remnants of underground facilities that shows that the aliens have been here for a very, very long time. And I suspect that there are certain epochs in human history where they go from covert to overt. I think the biblical Genesis speaks of a time when the interaction was overt, and then they went covert. I think what you're starting to see with the UFO phenomena is maybe a shift back to more overt exchange, overt activity, rather than covert. That's just my speculation, yes.
I was going to ask, as an everyday citizen, what do you suggest we can do to fight this or to stand up against it? I mean, we're all afraid.
Philip Corso
sometimes.
said that we made the biggest mistake we made was by keeping it secret, that the aliens could not have functioned as well as they have for as long as they have if people knew what the game plan was. And it's empowering ourselves knowing what's going on. It's like a little kid who's afraid of the closet. You go in the closet with a flashlight and say, oh, there's this, this, and this, and it's not as frightening. But if you keep yourself in a closet in your head, and I'm afraid to deal with this, then that gives them the power. If you know what's going on, that gives you the power.
Thank you.
Mel?
Hi, Jim.
Hi.
Just want to thank you for the bravery of speaking of these subjects.
Thank you.
People like Kennedy, Phil Schneider, Bill Cooper not here because they talk too much. I wanted to ask you, they say the Nazis lost the war but won the peace, the Nazis. Do you think there's a Nazi connection that's still alive and that's behind what we're experiencing in this world?
We only
Put you
got
on the
9
spot.
minutes. Well, we got 9 minutes. That's a whole nother lecture. Let me just tell you this, that Michael Schratt, what's the name of the new book by Joe Farrell? Roswell? Roswell and the Reich. Holy cow. We're all fascinated with the German connection with UFOs and flying saucers. Joseph Farrell is coming out with a new book called Roswell and the Reich, which shows that there's a direct connection with the Third Reich and the crash at Roswell. All I know is that's what it's about. My friend Michael Schratt says this book is going to blow the lid off of ufology. So, and this is coming out, Joseph Farrell, and it's being released. Do you know when it's going to be published, released? Soon. Today. Is it today? You can get it. Oh, go get it. Go for it. Go for it. Adventures Unlimited. Thank you. Yes. Roswell and the Reich. Or yes, Roswell and the Reich could blow this whole thing out of the water. So anyway, I have to admit that. Thank you, Mel. I would never be up here talking about this if it hadn't been for 911. When I saw it happen at with the trade towers in New York City back in 2001, it's like something is disturbingly wrong with this country. And we can't be silent anymore. We got to take our power back. Thank you.
There is information out there in the literature that says that Eisenhower was also contacted by Venusians. Wendell Stevens, I'm reading Onek's book.
Right.
I'm from Venus, and not from her, but from some of the other sources. I can't name them more specifically, but Wendell Stevens refers to them and says that there are a number of witnesses that say that yes, Venusians did meet with Eisenhower and tried to get him to stop the proliferation of nuclear weaponry, to end that weapons research. Are you familiar with this?
I'm not familiar with that, but not to say that it didn't happen.
There were good guys that were coming in there at the same time.
The good guys were being sandbagged by by Ike's advisors, and we were dealing with the Russians at that time, and the Russians weren't. We didn't think the Russians would be afraid about using nuclear weapons, so we had to maintain parity with the Soviets. But of course, you can go into conspiracy theory and say the whole Cold War thing was just a sham, just to steal more money for the alien agenda. So I was like, who knows? But thank you.
Would you please reiterate and clarify the comments that were made about the Pleiadians and make a statement about whether you think that option may still be available today?
Okay, he's asking about the Pleiadian. This Pleiadian component to the Eisenhower contact just surfaced recently through, like I said, the Vatican. Cristoforo Barbato claims he has contact with a Jesuit priest within SIV, which is the Vatican CIA, and he tells the story that Eisenhower was in fact met by two different groups, one being Pleiadian, one being humanoid, just like we do, and they told Eisenhower to please cease and desist from developing atomic weapons because it threatened the entire planet. It wouldn't just destroy the human race, it would destroy the planet, period, and make the planet uninhabitable for eons. And they said that was not an option that they felt. But they offered President Eisenhower free energy technology in exchange for reduction of atomic weapons development. But Eisenhower's advisors say, no, we can't do that. We have to deal with the Soviets. And free energy would, if we introduce free energy into our society, it would wreck our economy. And so Eisenhower defaulted to their advice, I think, much to our, it's the issue we still face today. We still need free energy. We still need elimination of nuclear weapons. It's a threat to our own survival and our future as a species. It is still a live, deadly threat. And yeah, and to answer your question, I would say probably the Pleiadian offer still stands. That if you would wake up and clean up your act, we would probably like to help you. But we have to make the decision. They can't do it for us. They can't impose it. The Greys are not shy about imposing their will on the human species. They think they own us. If you recall Bob Lazar at Area 51 claimed he saw a Bible, a book that outlined the entire history of the Greys' involvement with the human species. And there have been, umpteen upgrades, genetic upgrades within the human species. And you ask an abductee, and they said, well, when the aliens took me, I told them, you can't do this to me, you can't do this to me. And the little Greys will say, we have every right to do this to you, because they think they own us. And maybe from a genetic standpoint, they're right. But we still have the right of self-determination. And it's like, come on, people, let's act on that. Let's do it, because we have the power ourselves. Anything else? Any other comments? 2 minutes? Thank you. Pleasure. Thank you.
Astoria, south of Toledo, 40 miles south. Cleveland, yeah, you're on the other side of the state.